Nightwork, a Dave Brandstetter mystery. Author Joseph Hansen. Publisher Open Road Integrated Media. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 19. The rain stopped in the night. The early morning sky was clear of clouds and very blue above the chilly spur canyon called Concho. The water of the creek still ran hard and deep beside the crooked road, but the dips in the blacktop no longer held overflow. In a few hours, the stream would be a trickle. The rocks and sycamore trunks dry again. He stopped the Jaguar at the place where trucks left the road at night. He got out and stood gazing along the ruts between the oak tree trunks to the place of rusty barrels and dead ferns, except for the rush and rattle of the creek. The canyon was dead quiet. Birds sang on a morning after rain. Not here. A breeze pushed at his hair. The breeze brought the bad smell from the dump. He turned away and winced against the brightness of the sky. He looked up at the house hanging off the canyon wall high above. No sign of life. Maybe whoever lived there was asleep. He had come early so as to catch them before they left for the day to work. From a house like that, in a setting like this, why not? It had to be paid for. Everything had to be paid for. He got back into the Jaguar and drove on, looking for a road up. But all he found were bridges where the creek bent, and the road found better footing on the other side. The road petered out after a couple of miles, where the canyon narrowed and a waterfall came splashing down among rocks and ferns to start the creek. He drove back the way he'd come. The street map book showed no road along the ridge of Concho Canyon, but he explored it for it because it had to be there. It took a quarter of an hour. The road on the ridge was no more than a driveway, 1 car wide. The asphalt almost new. It ended where a 6-foot-high cedar plank fence ended. Day parked beside the fence and got out into silence. The noise of the creek far below hardly reached here. Quietly he shut the Jaguar's heavy door, and he walked quietly to where a double gate of cedar planks was closed and padlocked. He peered through the slot. The Winnebago camper stood alone in a 2-car port. It looked brand new, meant to go everywhere. Never been anywhere. Maybe this was wilderness enough for it. Another gate opened further along the fence. A leather thong hung down beside it. He pulled this, and sleigh bells rang. But no one came. "Hello," he called. "Anybody home?" His voice echoed in the canyon hush. No other voice spoke. He waited. He jangled the bells again. He called again. Then he took out his wallet, slid a shiny pick from it, and gently worked the spring lock. There was a round shine of brass in the rough cedar. The gate opened on a narrow deck on whose rails stood potted creepers and succulents. Some of the succulents bore very small, bright orange flowers. Below the deck, the roofs of the house made sharp angles. He swung the gate to close it. Behind him and its lower edge scraped envelopes. There was a mail slot in the gate. He gathered up the envelopes and closed the gate. A prefab black iron spiral staircase went down from the deck. He took it. Even his soft shoes made it gong. If the inhabitants were asleep, maybe that would wake them. The deck down here was wider, and trees and wooden tubs stood in its corners. The wall of the house that faced it was panels of sliding glass, closed curtains drawn. Dave stood regarding it, absently straightening the edges of the pack of envelopes in his hands. He wandered down the deck, looking for a door. It was a double door when he found it, locked. He didn't know this type of lock. An elaborate system of cedar plank staircases and decks surrounded the house. Someplace there might be an open window or door with an easier lock. He went from level to level, downward where the shadows of the tall trees made the morning chill again. The room he got into without trouble was functional. Wooden walled at one end, a workbench under a neatly ordered rack of tools. At the other end, a bare desk, a home computer, a file cabinet. A row of windows looked out into trees. The canyon slope falling off steeply below. He looked down. The road beside the stream was visible from here, although the tops of the oaks obscured the dump. Had the raw-throated roar of the big diesels and the silence of the canyon night ever wakened the people who lived here? Were they the ones who had agitated for the fallen signboard? He guessed he wasn't going to find out. Not today. The desk seemed the right place to leave the mail. He laid it there, turned away, turned back. He dug his reading glasses from his jacket, put them on, and blinked at the name typed on the top envelope. Mr. Lawrence Shields. He frowned. Didn't he know that name? He sorted through the other envelopes. Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence Shields. Jennifer and Lawrence Shields. Lawrence Shields. He let the envelopes fall to the desktop. Hell yes, Lawrence Shields was the senior vice president he'd waited for the other morning at TechRite. Met for a moment as the man had hurried on long legs out of the executive parking lot. Tall, thin, intense. But TechRite was 30-40 miles from here. He stared at the envelopes, and inside his head, Shields' sleek oriental secretary said again, He's rarely late. It must be the rain. He has a long way to come. What had been the apple-cheeked lad's name out there? Joachim. The one so flummoxed by the picket line at Foothill Springs. He'd said something about Shields' wife. He built her a glorious new home. And Dave saw in his mind's eye Shields' face again, under the dripping brim of an Irish tweed hat. Drawn, tormented, pain in his eyes, and something else. Startlement, maybe even fear. When Joachim told him Dave's name, David wondered then if he'd imagined it. What kind of sense did it make? He climbed glossy inner staircases, past stretches of polished plank flooring scarcely broken by isolated arrangements of furniture, never more than 3 or 4 pieces. He was reminded of those big unused rooms at old DeWitt Gifford's, except that life had left those. Here, it looked as if life hadn't really had time to get started. The beautiful tall shafts reaching for light, the high sheets of glass framing the trees, the floating lofts and quiet wooden bays of the empty house didn't breathe or speak of a past or a future, nor even of a present, in a bedroom that gave the effect of resting lightly in the tops of trees. Only half of the wide bed had been slept in. Sheets and blankets thrown back. One pillow dented. A lonely sight. In the house entryway, Dave took down from one of a row of thick wooden pegs an Irish tweed hat. Somewhere, a telephone rang, the jangle echoing in hollow wooden vacancy. He stood holding the hat, listening, counting the rings. Did they mean that someone was commonly here at... He checked his watch. 8:30 in the morning? If so, would whoever that was return soon? It wouldn't be Shields, would it? This was a work day. To reach TechRite from here and keep business hours, he'd have left long ago. His wife? The Jennifer of the envelopes? No. Lost his wife recently. Joachim had said, very suddenly. It was a shock. She was young. Dave hung the hat back on its peg. The telephone stopped on the 10th ring. Down in the workroom again, he pulled open the top drawer of the file cabinet. Like the desk, the cabinet was handsome, dark Danish teak. But like the house around it, it hadn't had much use. The few manila folders in the drawer did not stand up. They lay on their backs in a loose stack as if hastily dropped and forgotten. He put the reading glasses on again, lifted the files out. TechRite, shipping department. Do not remove. He sat down at the desk and leafed over the papers, yellow, flimsy carbon copies of waybills. 2 bore Paul Meyer's signature. Dave couldn't puzzle out from the strings of numbers and letters typed on the waybills what he had carried. He had trucked for TechRite on the 9th, when he was killed, but one date did interest Dave. It was the date on the latest of the waybills in these folders, and it was the date on which the news broke that Meyer's truck had not simply crashed, but had been bombed. That was when Lawrence Shields had brought these files home. Dave took off the reading glasses and gazed down the room At the workbench, he folded the bows of the reading glasses, pushed them into their pocket. Rose dropped the files back into their drawer, rolled the drawer shut. He walked down the long room and crouched to look under the workbench. There hadn't been time for junk to accumulate there. Not much. A few small empty cartons and a shoebox. Not empty. He lifted it, set it on the bench, took off its lid. Inside was a snarl of thin wires of many colors. Switches, gadgets. He couldn't name, but under these, each trim, flat oblong wrapped separately in cellophane was something he could name. Soft, corpse gray, and sticky plastique. Stand very still, a voice said. A man stood in the doorway to stairs that led up to the kitchen. Lauren Shields, tall, thin, and bald, checked sports shirt open at the throat, hop sack, trousers, corduroy jacket, crepe-soled shoes, a revolver in his hand. 45. The sort that U.S. law enforcement believes stops a man best. Brandstetter, Shields said. I suppose I knew it would be. I've read about you in the magazines. They exaggerate, Dave said. They get things wrong. One thing they didn't get wrong, Shields said. You never quit. If you'd kept out of it, Dave said, I'd never have connected you. I was sure someone knew where Paul Myers had been that night and why this house is so near. I had to find them and stop their mouse. What had Myers done to you, besides littering up your landscape? Killed my wife, Shields said. A lovely young girl. Do you know what she wanted from life? Everything gentle and beautiful. A house in the woods. Quiet, solitude, nature, away from the world. You gave her that, Dave said. She went walking, didn't she? Shields said bitterly. And stumbled on that dump, Dave said, and died of uncontrollable diarrhea, coughing, paralysis of the diaphragm. The way Ossie Bishop died? Shields' mouth spasmed at one corner. Who knew who Smithers was? Not even you. He came to your house to kill you. Your wife saw him. Even after that, you didn't know. Who told you? A sick old man you never even heard of, Dave said. Crippled, in a wheelchair. You worried about the wrong thing. Shields, do you know how H.L. Mencken defined conscience? The still small voice that tells us someone is watching. Not now, Shields said. No one is watching now. Dave said, but your conscience hasn't worked for a long while, has it? Your man, Joachim, told me that factory out there, is that right? Meant everything to you. Dave looked around at the handsome room, the lovely setting outside the long row of windows. It paid you well, didn't it? I bought you everything a man could wish for. A beautiful house, expensive cars, lovely wife. It didn't matter to you that it was poisoning people, not till it poisoned her. We're going to take a walk, Shields said. And then, Dave said, you didn't have the guts to plant your bomb at Techrite, did you? Instead, you blew up some man whose name you didn't even know. You didn't know Myers. Wait a minute. Maybe you did. You brought those cargo manifests home to hide them. I knew we were using gypsy truckers to get rid of certain chemical waste we weren't authorized to dump at Foothill Springs. You don't understand how impossible all those government regulations make doing business. And the horrible thought suddenly struck you that maybe Myers had brought his load that night from Techrite. So you snatched the papers, but you were mistaken. He didn't dump waste from Techrite in your front yard. Not that night, no. But earlier, someone had. Myers or Bishop or someone. I recognized the barrels, our code stenciled on the lids. He gave his head an impatient shake. It wasn't Myers. It was what he was doing. It was what he and his kind had done to Jennifer. His eyes were wet. He blinked them hard. He jerked the gun barrel. Come on, he stepped up, backward, into the doorway. and be very careful. A walk, Dave said. Where? Down to the dump. It kills everything that touches it, Shields said. He began climbing the narrow steps backward, the gun leveled at Dave's head. After the brightness of the workroom, the stairway seemed dark, and Dave watched his step. It wouldn't do to stumble. A noise from the kitchen above made him raise his head. He knew that noise. He had made it often lately. It was the rasp of the slide forward on the Sig Sauer automatic, the move made to get a bullet from the clip into the chamber. Cecil stood at the top of the stairs in sunlight, gripping the gun in rigidly outstretched hands. His eyes were wide, his skin looked dusty. Shields heard the noise. When Dave heard it, Shields tried to turn too quickly. He lost his footing. His gun went off. The Sig Sauer went off. The bullet thudded into Shields' chest and tore out through his back. Shields' blood spattered Dave's face. He tasted the salt of Shields' blood. Shields fell backward on him, and his dead weight was too much to hold up. Dave folded under it. He ended up on his back on the workroom floor, struggled to free his legs. He wanted to get to Cecil because up in the kitchen, Cecil was crying. It was the saddest sound Dave had ever heard. Romano's was quiet in its candlelight. The white tables with their shimmering glassware and silver had been vacated long ago. Shadowy figures drank in the little bar where Max polished glasses. At the corner table, Dave sat back, smoking a cigarette, holding brandy in a snifter, turning it gently, watching Cecil. Cecil was telling Amanda how it had come to happen. He had already told the story several times today. Dave was hoping that telling it enough would free him of guilt and grief. He doubted, but he hoped. So, then Lieutenant Salazar phoned. He had the information on the license number David asked him for from DeWitt Gifford's record book. Smithers' Mercedes, right? And I wrote it down. It was at the desk, in the back building. Those little bishops hopping around. I love them, Amanda said. But they do hop a lot. And Dave looked at his watch. And they should be sound asleep at the Hutchins' house in Halcon by now. And Melville, too. I don't think he's had much sleep lately. That Duchess made a good substitute for nightmares, Cecil said. So Melville heard me say the address as I was writing it down. And when I hung up, he came and read what I'd written on the pad. Concho Canyon. And he said Concho Canyon was where he took Dave to show him the dump off Torcido Canyon, where Dave went this morning to talk to whoever it was that lived up there in that house. Shields, Amanda said, who called himself Smithers. Turns out it was his wife's maiden name, Dave said. Salazar was right. Who would hide behind an alias like Smithers? So I tried to call Salazar back. Cecil said, tell them to get up there right away. Only by then he'd already left the office on his way to the beach. The LAPD found Silencio Ruiz's body. It washed clear down to the ocean. But I didn't learn that till later. All I knew was that Dave was walking into Shields and he wouldn't be ready. I thought I was going to talk to people who might be able to tell me something about the dumping up there that I didn't know. Something that might help me get to the Duchess. They had a marvelous vantage point perched up there on the side of the canyon. Salazar had given me Shields' phone number, too, Cecil said. And I tried that. Don't know what I thought. What good was that going to do? It would have done a lot of good, Dave said. But I couldn't answer it. Could I? You didn't, Cecil said. He told Amanda. Didn't leave me any options, did it? He didn't even have the gun. Left the gun with me in case Smithers came around. He liked shooting in the early morning. Dave said, remember? He was shooting Luella Bishop while I waited for him at TechRite. So I drove up there, Cecil said, and the Mercedes was there, and it was quiet. So quiet. He gazed at Dave across the candle flame, eyes round and ready to weep again. And I thought, he's dead. She'll shot him. But this time, I had the sense not to make any noise. Last time, remember? I went up to the door of that cabin and told everybody inside I was there, and they shot me full of holes. Not this time. Did a good thing, too, Amanda said mildly. I climbed the fence and tried a bathroom window. That's the one everybody forgets to lock. And inside the house, I heard them talking. And he set down his brandy globe, pushed back the black velvet barrel chair, stood. Can we go home now, please? He said to Dave. Poor child, Amanda said. You must be exhausted. I'm going back to television news, Cecil said. Whatever happens, it happens to somebody else. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.